Outside of checking her blood sugar, pricking her finger, putting it in the machine and really tracking that and bringing it to the doctor, anything that she ate that had a carbohydrate in it or sugar would turn into glucose. We would have to give her insulin. At that age, at 18 months, we would do that through an injection. It was tough, but I look back on it and what we would say is that it could have been worse.
Welcome everyone, this is Ekaterina with Trust Me Mom. Today I have Chad Thompson on my show. Chad is my colleague from the marketing world, former CMO of Blue Jeans, Verizon executive, really accomplished guy. He's doing so many wonderful projects right now, but the main focus today of our conversation is our kids and how sometimes medical diagnosis can make a big difference in our lives and even obviously impact how we're building our family life and careers. So we're going to dive deeper into medical challenges that Chad dealt with one of his kids. So Chad, welcome, and let's hear your story.
Well, thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. I appreciate that. So, wow, where do I even start? So without even telling you my age, but I will. So I'm in my late 40s. I started my career at Verizon. I started there in college and started as a job, turned into a 28-year-long career. So that was the start of my professional journey with Verizon, and had lots of different great experiences there along the way. From that perspective, 28 years, December of 23 is when I decided that maybe, hey, there's an opportunity to move on and take on some other challenges in life. And that's kind of where I'm at now for the last, what would it be? 23 to now, about 15 months, maybe a little bit. Have been really just kind of working with clients and partners, and of course you and the Ascend Marketing Organization and others to help them through the same challenges and things that I went through in the last 28 years. So, in that process, that professional journey, I have two beautiful children, and I should really say that I have four. I am remarried, so I don't want to discount the fact that I now have four children and two grandchildren. So I'm a 49-year-old with four kids and two grandkids. So it's been wonderful. But at the early age of, I would say, beginning of my career, my daughter was born in 2002. Her name's Kendall. She's now 22 years old, which is crazy to think through that. At 18 months, she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And so that was something that obviously any parent would not know what to do. And I think as parents for us, I was in my, goodness, I don't even know how old I was, my early 20s. First child, just starting my career. My ex-wife at the time was a teacher, so we had been established, had structure. I was traveling a lot with work, trying to build a career, and she was a teacher, and that's a very demanding job for those teachers that are out there that know how demanding that is. But yeah, she was diagnosed at 18 months, and that changed everything for us. So happy to go through some of those things, Ekaterina, or if you have some questions, we can go through that.
Yes. So tell me what it means, because clearly there were some medical interventions and extra care that you had to provide to your child. So what did it actually mean?
Wow, goodness gracious. So first off, we didn't even know where to start. I think, anybody that has a child, the first child you have, when you say they want to release you and let you take them home, you're like, there's no test, there's nothing I need to do here. Like it's a crazy experience. And you start to kind of learn it as you go as a first-time parent. Um, with her diagnosis, it was something like, all right, well, what do we do? Like, what is this? You know, at the time, the internet wasn't as explosive as it is now. Didn't have all this technology at your fingertips. So we had a lot of learning that we had to do through the hospital and the counseling that they provided. And then we really started to focus on community. For us, that was a big piece of that. So we started joining local family groups, specifically Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, JDRF. They had a chapter within Columbus that we joined, and then immediately they put us with parents that had children that with that. And that to me was probably the first great thing, because then you start to kind of compare and stories. And then you start to talk to other parents that have children that are in their teens and getting diagnosed. Kendall was 18 months. So she didn't really know a life outside of what it is. And for those that don't know what type 1 diabetes is, there's two types. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is when your autoimmune system senses something's wrong, and it attacked her insulin cells within her pancreas. And when it did that, it shut off the insulin cells forever, creating insulin. So when she eats anything with a carbohydrate or sugar, there's nothing that will take that sugar or carbohydrate and break it down, and it spikes her blood sugar, which, is, very bad in the sense, in the case of, what it does to your body. And then there's type 2, which is their body does produce insulin. It just doesn't know necessarily effectively how to manage and use it. And so people can take, drugs and things like that to help guide that. For Kendall, she needed insulin. She was insulin dependent, is what we would call it. And we would have to figure out everything that she ate and how much insulin to give her. And then we would have to do finger pricks, which would, at that time was challenging for an 18-month-old to, get their finger, prick them, put it on a machine, and then and measure that. So there was a lot of learning about the technical aspects, how this thing works. But community probably was the first thing. And then the biggest learning for us was structure. I would tell you, without a diabetic child, we might have other children, structure in their life is probably just as important as it was structure in her life. I think unstructured processes where you just kind of do things, it's not as great for, a child that has any type of, whether they have a disease or an illness or not. That to me is probably what I learned the most, is having a routine, a structure in place, because it helped us maintain and teach others too how to manage and support her as she was growing up.
Mm-hmm. And how often did you have to do the blood draw? Is it during the day? Do you also need to check
Oh,
on
very good
night?
question.
At night?
So let's go back a little bit. So when she was 18 months, she at that time was so young, and I would tell you, Children's was a little surprised at how young she was coming in, and so we had to learn a lot through that. And typically, what they want you to do when she went into the hospital, one of the signs that we knew that something was wrong is that she would come home from daycare or the babysitter, which was our next door neighbor, which was great. And she would continuously fall asleep when she would eat dinner. And so we just thought, wow, she had a hell of a time today. She had a good time. We felt good, like good parents. We were out working, and we left her home with somebody great. And she was great. The babysitter was. But then we started realizing there was just some other signs, that she was very thirsty all the time. That falling asleep was just very lethargic. And what the doctor would tell you is when you have high blood sugar, you feel like you've had a very big meal, like a Thanksgiving meal. You get very tired, very lethargic. And that's what was going on with her. Her sugar was probably spiking at that time, and she was getting very tired and fell asleep. But then we started noticing that she would take her little sippy cup and she would run to the sink and reach for the faucet for water. And that was another weird sign that she was drinking constantly. And then the third thing was she was through the evening or through the night, through the diaper changes, she was, peeing through her diaper every night. So she was multiple, so it wasn't common for us because we're like, why is she going to the bathroom so much and so it's because of all the water that she was drinking throughout the day. And so we decided to take her into at the time, her pediatrician. And when we took her in there, they checked her sugar and it was 700. Which for non-diabetics, for a lot of us, it usually ranges anywhere from 80 to 120. So she was well above the number. And she was probably living with that for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know necessarily when she was diagnosed, but we know something triggered it. We think it was an illness that she had where her body was fighting, like maybe a bad cold. And that triggered her autoimmune, which then triggered the attack of her insulin cells on her pancreas. And it started from there. So then after being diagnosed, you go through a lot of little training at the hospital, same experience as when they were first born. They say, all right, here you go. Here's your kit, here's your blood glucose monitor. Here's how you use it. And they'd say, give you a little diary to write down everything by the hour. And we check it about 8 times a day. So, once in the morning, maybe once before a snack, once before lunch, it became more of a measurement of numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because with diabetes, the higher the number, then your body starts to kind of have problems. So like for type 2 diabetics that have high blood sugar, a lot of problems they have is organs and feet and those types of things. It just has a bigger impact on your body longer term. The other side of it, which is when she goes low, would mean that she has too much insulin. We've given her 2 months insulin and she could pass out and die from that. So regulating her blood glucose is that you have to check it constantly. And you try to figure out, when she wakes up in the morning, what the number is, and when, before meals and after meals. Because we were giving her a shot at night that would give her a small dose of insulin throughout the entire 24-hour period of time. And it would last 24 hours. But what we were finding is that as she was getting older, more active, her body would use more insulin, or the activity would create these lulls and highs, so that 24-hour, what they call basal insulin, wasn't always reliable. And so we would always be constantly checking her blood sugar to the point where we were like, all right, what do we do here? And then the other piece to that, which is outside of checking her blood sugar that often, pricking her finger, putting it in the machine and really tracking that and bringing it to the doctor, anything that she ate that had a carbohydrate in it or sugar or anything that would turn into glucose, we would have to give her insulin. And at that time, at that age, at 18 months, we would do that through an injection. So we would syringe, bottle of insulin, draw it out, and then put it in her leg or in her arm. But we had to measure that, and I'd have to look at, all right, at that time, I look at an apple and say, based on the size of that apple, that's 20 grams of carbohydrates. I do the math and I'd say, all right, that's 1 unit of insulin. I draw that out. And then I would check her blood sugar first, see what it is. And if it was low at first, maybe I'd let her eat it a little bit. And then I would give her a shot to kind of regulate that number. Because the goal is to keep her in a range.
Mm-hmm.
So as a parent, at raising a child that at that young age, she doesn't know anything. She doesn't know how to read a label. She doesn't know what the numbers mean. All we know is that we got to keep her in this range that the doctor said that they wanted to be in. And we got to keep her from going too low. And we got to keep her from going too high. And so it was a game of diary and checking it and writing it down. Looking at days, looking at hours of the day, looking at our activity of the day, looking at food, types of different food. So it was a very interesting journey. So we
Wow.
learned a lot. It was tough, but I look back on it, and what we would say is that it could have been worse. There were other things. I mean, there's other things in life and other illnesses and other diseases that are out there. This was just one of many. And, the way we looked at it as, yes, from the outside looking in, if you have a healthy child, you would be like, wow, how do you deal with that? But we were like, well, we have to. So, just like we may look at another family that has another child with a different type of illness or a disease or a condition, you're like, how do you do that? And you're like, we do it. We have to. That's what we do. So you
Wow.
just figure it out. So yeah, it was tough. But yeah, so the eight finger pricks and the shots, I would say, were the most difficult piece. Because, I mean, we did that even in the middle of the night, getting up at 3 a.m. every night, checking her sugar to make sure it was not too low, because she would pass out and she could not wake up if her sugar was too low.
That is so tough. And
Yeah.
there's no break. What's impressive
No,
is that you cannot take a weekend off. You have to do it every day.
it's 24/7, 24/7. Yeah, I think the pivotal moment for us was when she was, I would say, goodness, about 3 years old. Um, my wife and I would take turns. We were both working at the time, so professionals raising a child with the diabetes, taking turns, getting up in the middle of the night and doing that. When we went into her bedroom and she didn't wake up, and we started kind of panicking a little bit. And my wife ran across the street. We had a nurse that was across the street, which was great. Again, we had a great community and support system. But then we had to do an emergency, they call it a glucagon injection, which is like this, oh my gosh, Katrina, it was like a needle that long. And it was like an emergency, I guess, what do you call it? Like an EpiPen almost. But it's for diabetics. And we had to administer that into her leg. So think about a tire, one of those little bicycle or a pump that you use to pump a ball up. That's how thick that needle was. And I had to put that in her leg and put all that sugar in her body to wake her up.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, we went back to the pediatrician and said, you know what, this 24-hour insulin that you've given us, plus all the shots, we have all the numbers. I mean, we were pretty religious on documentation. So we knew, and I'm an over analytical person, so I had everything down and we knew it. And so we said, what's next for us? And they said, well, there's not been many children that have done it, but they put her on an insulin pump. And so at the age of 3, she started wearing a pump, which is just really a device that she would wear like a cell phone or pager at the time. And it had a tube in it, and it would be attached to her leg or to her arm with the tube. And it would give her insulin throughout the day, and then we could program it versus giving her shots. So we avoided giving her a shot at night, and then it avoided us giving her shots every time she ate, a snack or a breakfast. And if you have children, we all know they want snacks all the time, right? So she was on a very strict schedule, breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack, bed. So she was getting, at least 4 shots, 5 shots a day, plus the 8 finger pricks as a
Mm-hmm.
child. So the pump allowed us to get rid of all those shots and allowed us to measure the blood sugar a little bit better. We just had now how to move to now learning how to use a device. And that's what you see most people wear today is medical pumps that just kind of do that. And there's much more to this, but yeah, that to me was the routine of figuring out like how to measure food, what, each, reading the labels on a food box, understanding what she was eating, the quantity of it, what she was eating, measuring it all out, figuring out the numbers, figuring out how much to put in. Um, that was a more challenging part. And then having all the supplies you carry. So I'm sure every parent that's listening probably is like, yeah, I do that, but it's structure, schedule, prep, copy paste every single day.
That's such a powerful story. And how did you handle birthday parties? Kids want to eat pizza and cake.
That
What
is,
did you
I would tell you that was hard. That was the hard part, right? Because being so young, we would, I think if I go back to that generation, a good generation, if I go back 20 some years, that there was a lot of, people would come in and say, hey, my kid has a nut allergy or a gluten allergy or butter or, whatever it may be. Um, but no one understood the diabetes aspect of it. And so we would always tell people, don't worry about it. Bring whatever, you have the party, let's do whatever it is. But as a parent, what we would have to do is just take a look at it and try to figure it out. Where it was more beneficial is if they would buy things that were, in a box, right? Like something that was manufactured already that had the nutritional guideline label on it. Because then we could look at that and say, oh, 1/8 of this is X amount of carbohydrates, and we could figure the math out. But if it was a homemade birthday cake, we would just say, we'd have to guess. So we would never deprive her of having things like that because we didn't want her to feel like she was different in that aspect, because everybody knew, even the kids knew, but we didn't want her to, feel like she couldn't have cake, ice cream, things like that. Now, we did teach her that what they call graze eating, which most children would do at a birthday party. They'd walk by and grab a chip or walk by and do whatever. She couldn't do that. Like, we would teach her that those are the things that if you want something like that, let's sit down, let's put it on a plate so we can measure it. And as she got on that pump, it was easier because we would just punch in numbers and it would just send the insulin through the tube versus me having to take her into the bathroom and inject something into her body. So the pump made the transition into those situations so much easier. But yeah, you're right. Parties like that were difficult. And then as she started getting older, I would say the come over and play dates became a little bit more challenging, or the grandparents saying, I want to watch them overnight or for the weekends. And so then that's a whole nother transitional stage, I think, of managing a child with a condition, is like there's stages of like, because you got to teach people, and a lot of people, don't understand like what it means.
Right, and sometimes it's life or death situation with severe allergies, or if she will pass out, it's really scary for you as parents. So how did you have courage to have a second child after such tough
You know,
first kid
very,
experience?
very, very good question because, um, because here's the thing, I don't even know, and I haven't done, I still follow a lot of the research. They don't necessarily know how diabetes is, if it's hereditary or not, right? So, our second child, she does not have diabetes, but she has a gluten allergy, which is what some would put in the same classification as an autoimmune disorder of some sort. And so does my ex-wife. So you could see maybe there's something there with some autoimmune type of things. Typically, a diabetic, if you look at it, most diabetics, type 1 diabetics, are also have a gluten issue as well. A celiac, they call
Mm-hmm.
celiac. Um, so my second daughter does have celiac, but she doesn't have diabetes. So when she was diagnosed with celiac, I think that's when we decided, all right, hey, do we want to try for a third? Because I wanted the boy, and but we just felt like it was like, all right, I think, are we playing our cards? Do we want to have another child that may or may not? But I think with the advancements of everything that's going on right now with diabetes, I think so much has changed. I feel fortunate that we did have Kendall. As much as she had it at a young age, she doesn't know anything but that. Versus if you're a teenager and you're a parent that has a teen that's just being diagnosed, that's a hard change because they've grown up with a lifestyle of doing whatever they want to a lifestyle now where they're on a very strict regimen. And diabetes can be a very impactful disease, just because of the impact it has on your body if you don't take care of yourself. And that's kind of where, from a type 2 perspective, that's where, a lot of folks that don't take care of, what they eat and exercise and things like that, then they start having, issues with their eyes and things like that. And so that's what we would teach Kendall is that, it's an inside joke, but, we'd be out in public and we'd look at our kid and we'd be like, are you high? And the parents would look around like, she's like 10 years old. But the language between us and our daughter was, is your blood sugar high?
Right.
It's like, so we always joke like, oh, we got to watch what we say because most people probably don't realize that. Like, but no, the highs are just as impactful as the lows. It's the lows that get you scared because when she does go low, like it's 50 and 40, then she starts losing like a little bit of comprehension. She starts losing focus and then she could pass out. So, that's the scary part of it. And she needs immediate attention for sugar. And so like, it's always having, some sort of, and me as a dad, I'm always making sure, hey, what do you have in your car?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have apple juice? Do you have like these things that we know that'll raise her blood sugar up real fast because she's a driver. She drives
Mm-hmm.
to work in college. She does all that stuff. So, but going back to that phases, going from being a baby to going to parties to going to school, then going to, college and then, into adulthood. It's been, quite a learning journey for us all. But I would tell anybody that I think that anything is possible to manage. It's just focus and structure and learning, and I think that's the biggest piece and probably learning from others that have gone through it, through a community, through like things like this that people talk about it. Because I always open myself up to say, hey, if you ever want to know, give me a call. And then, my daughter now that's what she's focused on. She wants to work with children that go through significant changes so that she can help them with kind of, hey, look at me. I'm 22. I went through college. I did all this. I've had to wear this thing since I was 3 years old. And, I check my sugar. I do all these things. And so I think kids can relate to that because she's still young, but she's passionate about going that route. So.
I have so many questions. I want to ask you how it impacted your career and your family life. I also want to ask about her mental state. Did she ever feel resentment? So
Oh,
where can we start unpacking it all? Do you want
so I
to?
would say, professionally, I would say it was a challenge because as we started to, you know, the routine is the biggest thing that I would tell everybody. Like, even without a child with any type of condition, they need structure. They need, you wake up at this time, eat breakfast at this time, we're out the door at this time, and then the day comes on, right? And when you don't have that, then it can be very chaotic. And so for us, it was that schedule of, all right, my wife and I would figure out which, who does what in the morning. She had to go out the door earlier because she was a school teacher. I had a little bit more flexibility where I had to, do the morning stuff for the children, and then she got off earlier. I had a later job, so it kind of worked out in that arrangement. Um, but then there were a lot of times when you had the babysitter or the daycare facility that would call and say, "Hey, she's acting a little funny," and then some of them were experienced and some weren't with checking her sugar, and then so we would have to kind of make those changes. So there was some flexibility in our schedules, and I think that's what allowed us to kind of like, all right, I got to rush just to check her sugar to make sure she's not in a problem. But for the most part, you know, people were willing to do the finger pricks. I think most of us, I don't know if you've ever had your finger pricked, Katrina. Have you done that?
Oh
It's
yeah, of
not.
course.
It's
It's
not
not
fun.
pleasant.
No one likes it. And so I think, and no one likes doing it. And so, but we found like, sitters or folks that we trusted that would learn, and then they'd almost become, extensions of our family almost, because they would know how to handle certain situations. Because we didn't really want her in like a big daycare facility where there were multiple children, because it would be, hard to manage 1 to 15 or 1 to 20. So we would try to find private daycare that we knew somebody that could, especially if through the organization that we were part of, would have recommendations for, hey, we use Ekaterina because she has it herself, or she has a son that has, and it's like perfect. It's like, already what to do.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, when she went to school in public school, then that was another thing. Work with the nurse. The nurse would be the one that would take care of it, and you'd have to have your phone always available. And when you saw the school call, it was an immediate, all right, what's going on? And then usually the nurse would tell you, we checked her sugar, it's this, what do you want us to do? So it's all, I think that, I forget what they're called. I think they're like 401 something, not a 401. I think there's a medical forms that you fill out for children with conditions at school. That was my wife's. She took care of that since she was a teacher. Um, but that allowed us to kind of have a set type of expectations of, testing or field trips, or, like this is what you do. And we always had a routine with the school as well. So, but yeah, flexibility was good. My schedule could be difficult with travel and stuff like that. But my ex-wife, being that she was a school teacher, was nice because she was in the location where we lived. So she was in close proximity to that.
Yes,
You had another
because
question there too.
yeah, well, to wrap up the work
Yeah,
conversation, I know corporate world, especially pre-COVID, was not kind to kind of this
yeah,
kind of family requests. And
yeah,
I can see that if you have a medically fragile child and you're in an important meeting or you're traveling, it's very hard, especially if you didn't have a reliable partner. But how did
yeah,
it impact your relationship at that time in the family? Where did your
yeah.
wife feel very overwhelmed and
Yeah, I would
really
say she
struggle?
did. Yeah, I would say yeah. I mean, I think it's, um, being in any household where both people work is tough because, I mean, it's separation of duties, right? It's like, especially when, you have two children and you have two people in a career and, and I'm traveling, she's not, but she's in a full classroom with 20 kids. So for her to step out, it's hard, right? For her to leave, she's got to get a substitute. For me to leave, I have to have flexibility with my boss. And, and I think it's just a lot of just setting expectations with the people that are around you. Like a lot of my coworkers knew of the situation, kind of knew what was going on with that. So if I had to step out for a call or something like that, if I was traveling, that was harder, right? There was always a plan. So, but we were good planners, we were good organizers, we were good schedulers. I mean, I think a lot of that though is what you carry into business. I mean, if I go back and I look at where I was and all the habits that I had picked up, I've carried into every job that I've had. I mean, I'm over analytical. I love to track everything. I'm very organized. I'm very focused on the schedule. I like a routine. And so it's kind of like, did I pick that up because that's the way I was? Or did I pick that up because I learned that from my daughter? She taught me to be that way. And so, but, I think for her and everything else like that, it's, it was tough. I think she grew up with it, questioned it a lot. She didn't understand, but I think as she got older and she learned more about it, I think she understood, that she was different and that she needed to, she didn't want to be different, but I could show you a picture, but of a letter she wrote. I just found it, but I'll save that for a letter, another meeting. You don't want to read it over. You want, the people listening don't want to read the letter. It was a sad one. So
Mm. So
yeah,
yes, my other question was about, did she feel resentment that she has that condition, and did you have to find any maybe therapy resources, something where it would be a natural response to feel angry
yeah,
or resentful, where everybody else is fine and I have to struggle with it. Why
yeah,
me?
yeah. She did. I mean, she fought it a lot of times. I mean, I think there was she would get angry, like especially when we'd say no to things because, when her blood sugar was 400, it was like, all right, Kendall, we really don't want to give you a shot just because you want that cookie that everybody else is having. So, it did suck, let's be honest. I mean, it would be like, all right, here's some salami and cheese, which was all free. I call free meaning it's carb free, which would mean it wouldn't spike her sugar. She can have as much of cheese and as much of the meats and things like that. But what 4-year old, 5-year old wants to eat a cheese, salami, pepperoni type of thing when everyone else is eating cookies,
Mm-hmm.
So she'd have her moments, which is fine. I mean, I think all of us would have that. I mean, I'd be upset if I couldn't have a soda or something like that. And that's why I say is at the early age she's learned to deal with that because that's the way it was. But when you turn into and you get diabetes at an older age, that's a harder thing to change. So because you are used to being able to just eat as many potato chips as you want. Well, no, for a diabetic, her, she needs to know that, oh, I can only have 5 chips. That equals this much. Versus you just can't just grab the bag and just start eating. So, so she did have a lot of that. But you know, she never rebelled, which is one of the things that we still look back on. I would tell you, going to college was probably the first time that we felt like she changed a little bit because she was free of like us hovering and watching over her. She's done well, but she is not, we still, coach her. We ask her about her A1C, which is a 3-month average of her blood sugar. Um, we still, now technology, she has a continuous glucose monitor that she wears on her arm that checks her blood sugar nonstop, which then Bluetooths into her pump, which then gives insulin. So technology's made things so much easier now where she doesn't have to prick her finger. And even then with that, the devices and being in telecommunications for as long as I was with Verizon, having an app on your phone that's connected to her app, I can check and see, like where she's at and whether or not. And, there for a while, she didn't like the fact that, like, hey, Kendall, sugar is a little high. What's going on? Oh, I just had something, don't worry, I gave myself insulin. Or, she was at a wedding. She's 22 now. She was at a wedding over the weekend, and her Dexcom, which is the continuous blood sugar monitor, continuously going off in the middle of the wedding because her blood sugar was going down. It was alerting her with a loud little beep. She couldn't get it to stop, so she had to leave the wedding and sit outside and get something to bring her sugar up. So she still deals with it on a day to day. I think people have gotten used to it a little bit. I think now people see pumps, they see patches, they recognize. They may not know what it is and what it does, but it's more common today than I think it was when she
Mm-hmm.
was,
Mm-hmm.
like 20 years
And
ago.
can it be moved to different parts of the body, or it's always in the same location?
She does her arm. She can sometimes do it on her leg, and then in her belly, on the front of her belly. So the challenging part with that is that those get changed every 7 days, and so she has to put a new one on every 7 days. The pump she wears, the pump is like any cell phone, but that needs to be changed probably every 3 days. And so, she does have to move it around different parts of her leg, the backside. There's certain parts of her body that she needs to put it on because if she doesn't move it around, she can develop scar tissue. And that
Mm.
scar tissue then would inhibit the performance of the insulin coming into her body. So, that was another thing where we used to do it for her as she was growing up. And then as time went on, she started teaching herself. So it's the phases of development, the phases of the child becoming more self-sufficient, learning how to manage their own illness and their disease. Now it's like, we just have to remind her that, hey, even though you have a lot of freedom, we're still going to ask the questions and still say, hey, what'd the doctor say? And, hey, when I go visit her for college days, I'm like, well, let's go in your car. Let me check out your glove box. Do you have any emergency supplies? No, I don't. Okay, well, let's go to Costco. Let's blow it up. So we still do all that, but for the most part, it's become kind of like who we are. It's a part
Mm-hmm.
of
Wow, you just enriched my understanding of the world so much because that's another facet of life that I never dealt with, but it sounds challenging,
Mhm.
also kind of mind expanding, and helps me develop more compassion and understanding. how many times we see people and we have no idea what's going on in their life,
Oh my
what
gosh.
they're dealing with. And even that constant pain, so as you were describing that she had to either prick a finger or move that pump, it feels like it's always something that is either hurting or at least she has to move it,
Navigate
and it will
on
be
it.
physically painful
Yeah.
too.
It's a reminder, right, that she has something attached to her. It's like, and I think that's to me, even to this day, look, I'm a baby when it comes to pricking my finger. I hate it, but she's done it so much on all of her fingers. It's sad, but it's like, it's all calloused up. So she doesn't feel it as much as you and I would. Uh,
Mm.
but, it's still, I think, if for me, having a tube attached to your body into a pump, a machine that's continuous and that's Bluetooth into this thing, it's like, wow, technology has just evolved so rapidly. And so, there's been some research, there's been some development where, stem cell replacement of the potential opportunity of insulin cells regenerating in the pancreas so that she can do that herself. So, that's encouraging. I think the next chapter is going to be, for her having children. And then that'll be the next step. It's like, how does she
Yes.
manage her diabetes, having children, and, all that fun stuff. So I think that'll be the next hurdle to jump over. And then obviously the question is will that child have the, we don't know, the high propensity to have the same type of, autoimmune disorder type of a thing. But,
Mhm.
but you just live in the present. So,
Yes.
but you're right. But when I do look at other families though, and I think about the same thing. I'm like, wow, that would be tough. But I'm sure they're like, yeah, it is. But we figured it out. We have a routine. I was mentioning you offline. I think the other day, my daughter's watching. She's doing life services classes, and one of the internships she has this year is watching teaching a classroom full of 20 kids of all kindergarten age, and she is learning what it feels like to watch 20 kids, and the fact that every single one of those children have a different personality. Two of them have autism. Some of them have allergies. Some of them don't have anything. Some of them have behavioral challenges. And she's learning that, all right, what works with this individual doesn't work with this person, and vice versa. So I said, that's a really good job to have, especially going into the field that you're at, is knowing that everybody's different. What works for one person doesn't work for everybody, and so, and that's what she loves about working with kids, is that she can talk to them at their level and understand. And then you always talk to the mom and dad and say, hey, in these moments where they're just on whatever, like they're having a panic attack, what's the trick? And they're like, the mom's like, give her a glass of water. And kind of was like, she had that episode, gave the kid a glass of water, and all that took was it. It's like the little things, right? But I told her, I'm like, well, what'd you learn? And she said, I learned that I have to ask questions. I have to, bring it to the attention of the mom and dad, ask, what works, what doesn't work, and then apply it versus think that, that there's no answer. There is an answer. It's probably something they've dealt with, and they know how to fix it because they're dealing with it at home. So, but she's growing up and she's learning, which is good. And then she's passionate about taking what she's learned and using it as a career, which is even better. So,
That's so nice to hear. Despite all these challenges, it sounds like first you developed some of the skills that helped you be more efficient at your work, and then she also saw how she struggled with some of the things, and now she can apply the same
Yeah.
methods to other kids or her future work. So that's inspirational to
Well,
hear.
yeah, I would even love to think that she also helped us keep the family healthy, right? Because I mean, we couldn't, how could you eat a cookie in front of a diabetic that couldn't have a cookie? You know what I mean? So it's like, that's not fair. I mean, I could hide myself in a closet and be like, oh, I want to have my own little snack, and everyone. So, we always joked about that as a family. It's like, we didn't have as many sweets around the house.
Yeah.
I felt bad for the second child because she wanted to do whatever she wanted, but she was on the same snack schedule, same, you get the same amount of snacks as your sister, and even though, but but yeah, there's a lot of learning. I think you learn about yourself, you learn about your child. I think you learn about your limits, and then I think you learn a little bit about the fact that there's harder things in life that other people are going through, and you just have to be like, all right, well, how do I focus on this, knowing that somebody else is focusing on that, but then finding people that you can talk to sometimes, and then they're like, hey, you'll get through this, it's easy. And then you're like, I need to hear that because I was going through it. That was a bad day. I needed to know that that it's not always going to be like this. So
Yeah.
there's hope. Definitely hope.
Thank you so much. That
You're
was
welcome.
definitely a conversation filled with hope and great examples. Thank you, Chad.
You're welcome.